Hi, I'm Nicole Torgersen.
I'm Teresa Aguilera.
And we want to talk a little bit about our journey at Gap, fostering trust while building Stitch, our design system. I think it's really interesting. I'm hearing a little bit of a theme from their first couple of talks about it's not just the parts, but maybe it's kind of how we work together. So we're kind of moving along with that theme. I'm going to take a little bit of a step back to explain where we are within our organization. So at Gap, within our digital space, we have primarily 2 camps. We have a couple of others in there as well, but for example purposes, we have a handful of product teams that are working on what we call associate enablement tools. They're tools that help our associates in our stores understand where the inventory is, process price changes or markdowns, and eventually, through our point of sale, actually help our customers purchase the product. Another set of product teams is our e-commerce experience. So this is digital, online. Customers can navigate to, find, learn about, and eventually purchase their product, et cetera. On the left side, you'll see we have our brands. So our brands operate as separate business entities within our organization. They have fairly large organizations in and of themselves. And when we interact with them specifically for our purposes, or the product team's purposes, there's like a subset of teams that we collaborate with. So there's our marketing team, production, creative, and merchandising. A few more, but those are the ones we speak with the most. So what we find ourselves about there. So Stitch, that's our brand icon for our design system. Stitch is sort of at the epicenter, and we actually have, Teresa and I oversee 2 design system teams, which are fully dedicated, one supporting the associate enablement tools, the other supporting the e-commerce experience. And this is really interesting for us because we have 2 teams that are focusing on 2 very different spaces. So this enables us to sort of test and learn in different areas and borrow different ideas or different methodologies that might have helped one team move along in their journey and bring it over to the other team where they are in their journey. Because they're almost never in basically the same point of their journey. And a few things that we struggle with probably aren't too dissimilar from a lot of what you struggle with. So working across siloed teams. There's a lot of teams here. Even within either the associate enablement or e-commerce, they're not all necessarily in unison or talking with one another. We find ourselves sort of almost learning different dialects between the different cross-functional teams, the different functions, and the different verticals. We struggle with building moving trains. All these product teams are moving as fast as they can to push something out. Well, we're finding a way to sort of lean in and help facilitate them and their success while they're starting to build all of their trains while they're moving. Contribution's hard. Transparency, understanding who is doing what and helping all the teams understand what we're doing and how we're sort of plugging into their systems. Naming, for those who have been going to the system a little bit, you've heard naming is hard, right? And I almost want to do a course of that. Naming is hard. Adoption. Are people actually using our design system? Some of them might want to, but again, they're building moving trains, so that can be really difficult to adopt while you're trying to build something, push it out. So in our journey to evangelize design systems within our organization, we have used a handful of analogies to explain what is a design system and how it can be relevant to the teams we work with. So we have a few that have come across our path. We haven't used all of these, but let's kind of try a few on together. Top left. We are building a pantry of elements that you can use to build your product. That's great. That's sort of just talking about the things in the design system, right? Middle, so we're the government. We create rules and we help oversee their people meeting those rules via doctrines. We don't really care to be the ones making up the rules. We'd actually rather that the partners within our product teams, they help us make up the rules and the honor system kind of prevails. We're the police. Heard that one a little bit earlier today. We're the police. So we oversee that people are actually abiding by the design system and using all the tokens and the components in the right way. that couldn't be further from the truth. I think we kind of felt like we were there earlier, and that's what we were aspiring to do, is to create the system, and people have to use it for consistency purposes. But we don't want to be the enforcers. Enforcers is not a good place to be. Neither is being a janitor. I'm sure some of you probably recognize this guy. That was a funny picture. This has actually come across our paths too, not necessarily within our group, but in speaking with other folks, where the concept has actually come to us from other teams, sort of, where they sort of expect, like, hey, we have these components and they weren't really built to your standards. Can you just clean them up for us? And we're like, no, you can reread our standards and you can contribute. That'd be great. We're the librarians. We're cultivating a set of components and curating them so that they are ready and available for anyone in the company to use. It's getting a little bit closer, but that's still, there's a lot of focus on the actual parts of the component. We want to pull back and look at the larger gestalt, right, of a design system and what that really means. We are tending a garden. Everyone contributes, everyone tends, and it's sort of for the greater good of all of us. Well, great, but still a little bit of focus on the parts. Last one, we are fostering a community, aligning shared goods and services. There's something to this mindset, and as we started to think a little bit more about our journey over the past several years, building up our design system and where we started and where we've come to as of sort of this year, we started to realize that there's really something a little bit more to the community piece. So it's based on culture and society, right? So over the years, we've been working to justify our design system and create and scale it. We've been focusing on articulating the vision of the product itself, right? We can create the design and the code. We talk to our partners about these amazing efficiencies gained and the consistency of our experience and how we can have this awesome shared language. And that's great, but is a design system really the product? Is it a set of tools we use to build other products and experiences, or is it a little bit deeper than that? So culture is the beliefs, behaviors, and objects and other characteristics shared by groups of people. As our dialogue evolved, we began to realize that our vision was set a little bit more in a cultural shift than the creation of a tool. We want our teams to be enabled to work together toward a common good a little bit more seamlessly. And looking a little closer at the language involved in the design system and in design in general, you'll see that there's a commonality with the intent. Component and style libraries, shared resources. Standards are really shared values, right? Documentation is shared language. Roadmap is a shared destination. Communication strategy is a shared understanding. Contribution, almost done. Contribution, shared equity. Governance, shared execution. So as leaders, it's become more clear to us what exactly we're building. We began with the intent to create this vast system of tools and ensure everyone's using them correctly. And we realized that the opportunity to create a cultural shift within our company of how to work together differently is much more meaningful. So looking back on how we operated to build and scale our system, we realized that the methodologies we employed have had a lot to do with shaping collaboration and building trust. And we'd like to share some of those methodologies and practices that have worked for us and a few considerations for you should you choose to employ them.
Thanks, Nicole. Nicole's amazing. Yeah, so let me see if this is working. Perhaps it's not. I'll just use this.
The button works.
Problem solving on the fly. Okay, so like Nicole said, we have all these parts, right? And everybody kind of thinks of these parts as when you have a mature design system, you have all these pieces. And it can seem sometimes when you're starting a design system, at the beginning especially, that these need to all happen at once. And in hindsight, what we wanted to share is that when you put the human lens on it, that communal lens that Nicole was alluding to, you can actually kind of pace these out linearly. So the libraries, you start with all the parts, right? And then you build up into the standards in that language, and then suddenly you're sharing a destination, and you can bring people in, and they're contributing, and you have the equity built up. And that trust is the kind of thing that we're trying to work on in our organization. And what you can see here is it's a little bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This isn't entirely an accurate analogy because that is actually very fundamental. And this is going to be a little less linear. But until you have a really solid grasp on some of these base ones, like the resources themselves, the standards, you're not going to be able to build on it and get to the next level because you won't have that stability built up. And so until one level is well established, the next is kind of unattainable. So we would encourage you to, like, it's easy for us to say in hindsight a little bit, but think about it this way. Don't feel like you have to boil the ocean that way. And of course, this is a continuum, like I said, or maybe it's a loop. And I would say we're fortunate enough after years of dedication to this project, after working in a silo on a lot of this stuff, that we are now about here, which is a really long way. I'm not gonna lie, this feels great. But at the same time, what's fascinating looking back with the benefit of hindsight, we've been working on this for quite a while, is that this is now what I think about when I think about growing a design system. I don't think as much about how many components we have and how many places it's been adopted. Those are totally important, they're metrics that matter, but I would argue they are merely metrics if you're doing the big work of a design system. They're the direct result of dedication to organizational and even emotional growth inside your organization that brings a design system to its full potential. So with that in mind, I'd like to share a few concrete examples of how we were able to achieve that sustained growth through collaboration and trust, because as Nicole alluded to, we're working in a very, very vast array of product teams, different mindsets, everyone has different agendas. And what we're hoping to do is, with Design System, is being at the center, one of the only central teams at GAP really, we're able to reach into these other teams and have them share some of these things, the values and the resources. So I'm gonna share a few things that we have tried. Some of them didn't work out super great. I'm gonna start out with one that was only okay. This is an easy one though. When we first started out, Nicole and I are both coming from design background. We're both UX designers. All the UX designers were excited about Design System, and we started with our product with being just styles and fonts, colors, typography, things like that. It was not components. So we started to meet the designers where they were. We went to every design review. Has anyone tried this? How's that going for you? How'd you get out of all those meetings today, in fact?
Yeah.
So we basically, we attended every design review. It was insane. Pointed out consistencies, gleaned what we could, and harvested it into the system. This was really easy to do. It provided a lot of visibility into everything going on. But entire meetings would go by and be completely irrelevant. Maybe they're talking about something totally unrelated to Design System. Or maybe they actually nailed it, and then we didn't have to be there. Psychologically, it was also a little bit damaging because we started to be kind of like adversarial or like a police state. And it also kind of taught people, didn't teach people to fish. Because if you're coming through and pointing out all the inconsistencies and someone can count on you to clean it up, they're going to count on that forever. And that's not really sustainable. But the biggest blocker for this one, and it's probably not a surprise, is this just doesn't fit with our staffing model. It doesn't scale at all. So the UX team grew threefold in the time that I've been there, and we went from 8 to 24 designers, and from maybe 5 products to 10 or 12 products. 2 of us, even if we hire a lot more people, we just can't attend all those meetings. That's too much work to keep direct eyes on. It has to be a little more give and take. We were giving too much and not getting enough back. I will say that dot there under shared equity, which if you recall is the contribution area in our flow, we're going to bring that back. We're about there right now. We're bringing this back. We've been talking to folks at lunch about how to make this happen, what they're doing in their organization. If you have ideas, let me know. But probably something will come back in this realm. But it's going to focus more on enabling designers than on monitoring them. Another easy one, office hours. Is anyone doing office hours? Yes. This one's actually surprised us. This kind of worked. We basically really just wanted to put people in a room and tell leadership that we're available. But it turned out this built a lot of empathy with our stakeholders because because it was a space, it's a space, the way we run our office hours is people bring troubleshooting problems to us, and then they're able to work through things live with our designers and developers. That means that we, as a design system team, are getting direct insight into some specific challenges that our stakeholders are facing. And that by itself builds empathy. It not only helps us fix bugs in our system, but it helps us understand their motivations, their deadlines, their mindset, and that is just a really great tool for growing the system and building that trust. So my advice on this one is just do it. It's low-hanging fruit. If you're not doing office hours, probably do them. And if no one shows up, no time wasted. You can just work on stuff right there at the same time, but they'll show up. Okay, this one is my favorite. Developer embeds and ambassadorships. So if you can do one, and this is a lot of organizational buy-in to get this one done, but if you can do one, do this one. Basically, we take people whose main loyalty is to design system and then sent them off to a product team. Like literally, just sent them off to go be embedded in that team. They don't have responsibilities, they're not picking up stories on our board or tasks on our board, they're just doing anything they can on that product team's board. We were lucky that an opportunity presented itself in the business. We were switching the entire platform over to React. We had a very tight deadline. All the product teams, which are responsible for different areas of the site, just were up against these deadlines that were impossible. We decided to, and we weren't getting the answers we needed because our stakeholders weren't available anymore to collaborate with us. So we instead decided to take half of our team and send them off to these other product teams. This was amazing. Not only did we help in a really tight business situation and get a lot of traction there, we also were able to evangelize the styling product and make sure it was used properly in all of these new React components. But beyond that, we started to understand some unique organizational challenges that we, being central in a silo and not working on a product going to production, we were blind to these issues, and we got to experience them firsthand. So if office hours gives you a really great insight into specific little tiny details that are coming up, embeds are going to give you the whole picture, and it just changes everything. I will say you should time box this one. Definitely don't give up your dedicated design resources forever. That is dangerous. But this really built a lot of goodwill we could call upon later as well. So once we brought our developers back, the core folks that were left had started already putting some things into action, and we brought those developers back in, and we could really ramp up. And then when we needed a favor later, we knew who to call. We knew who those subject matter experts were inside those product teams. And it goes both ways. We also have had several people join the design system team who had worked previously on product teams. And that is just a really great cycle. We've done a second iteration of this as well, which you can see kind of down here, which is when we did contribution. Once we didn't have the organizational ability to send somebody off in a more full-time capacity, we just kept the best parts. So we kept what teams told us was most important, which is dedicated contact and pairing, and we sent some people over to do a couple of sprints, help people put that first contribution into our system. And so we'll bring back this one back again, but we kind of scaled it back and called it ambassadorship. Call it what you want, but do this one. Design sprints. This is one I wanted to talk about. I don't know how many people are familiar with design sprints. They're pretty popular in lots of different formats. They're basically cross-functional multi-day workshops. And when we needed to understand where we're going or how we're getting there or why, we'll run a design sprint. These also take a little bit of investment because they are a lot of people and a lot of time. But these will help you identify that shared destiny, the destination I'm talking about in the middle. Although you don't always have to have them in that context. We did some early on when the field was wide open and we needed to lay everything out on the table, select a path. We utilize lean UX methodologies, which I'll talk about a little bit later in that one. But it helps you all be familiar with the uncertainty and what you're working with. Inevitably, you'll identify values and goals as part of this process. At least that's my favorite part. And as a team, you would decide those. And you decide, that way you as leadership can come in and provide some guardrails, but you have a lot of buy-in from your contributors, from the people that are working with you. So I would say it's not dictated at all, those values and goals. And then most of the time, we will have activities that foster ideation. That's really the heart of the design sprint, is that it's hands-on, it's dirty, getting your hands dirty, getting those sticky notes out, and maybe having debate. Invite all of that. It's really a valuable part of the process. You can also look outside the core team to gather info, and I think that's a really important part I'm going to talk about in the next slide. But basically, we ask partners in UX, in product and engineering, and project management to join part of the 4-day sprint. They aren't usually going to be available for the whole thing, but they can be for just a couple hours. Take it. It's really awesome to get their partnership in these. So to dive into that design sprint methodology a little bit, one of the tools we like to use is journey mapping. This is one that I really enjoy because it really brings a lot of that empathy in, and you can do it either inward looking inside of your own team, or you can pull all those partners in from the outside. So what we do is you get a group together. Multifunctional groups are best, so product, BAs, developers, designers, all on the same team. Try not to let people silo themselves. If you have to assign them, you can. But the groups chart out every touch point and step involved in completing a specific task. We'll often give each group their own task, and then we have them identify the pain points, the opportunities in there. A lot of it's speculation, and that's fine. You might end up with a big sticky sheet with a whole bunch of question marks on it, totally fine. But you get sticky notes and pads of paper with markers, and the output is this gigantic piece of paper with a crazy-looking flow that is not beautiful, but it is the truth. At least it's the emotional truth. And you present that back to other groups for validation, and then you have more debate, and it's great. It's just great. So we use journey mapping every time we need to tap into the needs of our users, which is typically at design sprints, but can be also other times as well, even mini sessions. These are super helpful to do internally to establish questions to go out and ask. So you can do them inside your team, and then you know what kind of intel you need to gather. But it's even better to bring folks into the exercise and get that direct feedback right away. Nothing like sticky notes and Sharpies to break barriers. I'm telling you, it's magic. So folks in different functions can get to see the challenges of others. This is what's really important. If you do this in your own team, that's one thing that's great. But if you get people to come in and they get to hear the challenges of the BA or the challenges of that product manager, they're going to have a lot more empathy for when their thing isn't done on time or when something had to slip through the cracks. They're going to understand that. And you, as a design system team, fostered that understanding, and that is really powerful. So good times to do this are at the beginning, when you're like around wayfinding even, maybe when folks need to know what's in the system, so the shared resources time is a good time to do this. We're so close to the work, we're sometimes immune to its faults, and we know that thing's called a carousel, or that's called a popover. Not everyone does. You can also do this during the road mapping process. I think this is really valuable to work through intake from stakeholders and how you're going to accommodate all of their needs. And really big one around contribution. So our team builds components to put them in the system. Other teams build components to use them. They have a very different agenda. And journey mapping helps us understand their priorities a little bit better. And finally, we'll fine-tune governance. We're not quite there yet, but we'll definitely use journey mapping to fine-tune that governance because that's a little bit more of a collaborative space as well. Co-creation, this is so great. I was so excited to see Denise's slides this morning. And I won't go into this too much because she went way more into it with a lot more value than I'm able to provide here. But co-creation is something you should totally do. It's amazing. And when it's done the right way, journey mapping is a kind of co-creation. That's just one way to think about it. But it takes a number of different forms. So on our design system team, we just encourage a lot of pairing. Just the small kind of co-creation goes a long way. If you build that into your day-to-day values, just things that you do, pairing can make a big difference. And that's between developer and also developer and designer, just sitting together and creating those animations, creating those solutions together. On a larger scale, however, we use co-creation a lot when we work with our brands. So you saw on the screen that Nicole shared all those brands. Yeah, Gap has a lot of brands. And they do all operate on their own. And if you've ever been to their stores, they have different energy, different vibes. really goes also in line with what Val was saying. We want to co-create an experience with them. We started this early on when we did a redesign of the sites for responsiveness, but it's time to revisit that. And we're starting to blur the lines. So it used to be just around color and type and those kinds of sort of surface level visual language things, but we're starting to get into a space where we co-create components, marketing components, configurable components with our brand partners. And often the co-creation looks very different with the team at Old Navy compared to the team at Athleta. They're just different people, they have different brand values, and we won't know those brand values unless we co-create with them. It's easy to sit at the center and try to emanate out, but it's important to bring that all back in. And now we have a relationship that enables more ambitious strategic improvements. So beyond things like type and color and components, we can start to strategize with the brands on things like sound and motion and icons. And that can really differentiate them even further. So outward communication. This one could mean anything, right? But really, it's just a reminder to look up from what you're doing. I went through a lot of slides just now, and if you're doing all that, you're really busy. That means that you might forget to tell people of all the great stuff that you're working on. When you're working with people, especially when you're collaborating directly with your stakeholders and your partners, it's easy to assume that everyone just knows what's going on because you're so communicative and so involved. But the truth is, a lot of people in the organization probably don't know any of that that's going on, or they heard it through the grapevine and it's not accurate. So this is just a reminder to put your head up, kind of think of some things you can share out, and not just telling for show and tell sake, but because you know that other teams might benefit from the work that you're doing. So forms that this takes for us, we do a newsletter. It doesn't sound very exciting, but it kind of has helped a lot. That allows for asynchronous absorption of information, so people who are really busy, all the way from people on product teams to people way up in the SVP level, they can absorb that information and refer to it later. We do showcases every sprint, a showcase or a demo showing all of the work we've done, and we empower the developers to do that and work with designers to tell the business story alongside the technical story. And we also do a thing called That UX Life, where we basically get into the process and show our UX designers on the UX team every week. We'll present maybe how to deliver specs in a component world, or how to work with the design system, or look at this new component and what was the process like for co-creation, and try to share out the learnings that we have with the designers. Scorecard, I'm almost done, I swear. Scorecard is a really fun one. So it's very specific type of communication is kind of the way that I think of it, and that's why I put it here in the slide. It's built off of a ton, so basically the context of the scorecard is that we've built a ton of stuff, a ton of components, talking about components here. Built a ton of components. People want to use them, but they have expectations of how they're going to work. We've authored some standards. The contributors are on board, but it's kind of a wall of text. If you've ever seen like a big thing of like, this is how it should behave, and this is how it needs to be accessible. A little bit hard to parse. So scorecard is a shortcut sort of, for communicating the quality of a component. And our scorecard is going to take the form of both a quadrant system for scoring and then a visual output. It's not done yet, so I'm not going to show it, but you can come talk to me after. But basically, it's essentially resulted in a pass-fail checklist for all of our components. And we have 4 quadrants we grade against. Every component gets graded on code quality, which includes some accessibility standards that can be automated, performance impact, so how heavy it is on the page, usability, and also includes some accessibility that needs to be more manual, and citizenship. So how good is this component at being part of a family, part of a system? Does it drag the system down? Now, every component that makes it in doesn't have to be 100% compliant with our scorecard. The scorecard is just a tool to help us assess how close to prime time this is, or how close to MVP. And so it enables contributors to check that they have interpreted those standards correctly as they build, so people use it when they build, and then when people pick the component up to go to implement it, it's an outgoing communication of quality for people who want to use something. They can use something experimental that has a very low scorecard score, but they need to be expecting it might be a little bit buggy. We find that this is a tool the scorecard is a tool that enables contributors. Oh, I already said that, sorry. We find that this tool promotes transparency, which is a really big part of communication. It does the gatekeeping for us also, so we don't have to be those police or those gatekeepers or those cleanup crew. It sets something out that's a little agnostic and isn't personal. And people can trust what's in the library, and they're all using the same language when they talk about components and quality. Okay, last one. Build, measure, learn. This one looks a little funky, and the reason is this is more of a recurring approach than a specific event, but we use it a lot. So early on, we had a really big problem space when we started the design system. We didn't really know what the system would look like. We didn't really know what form it should take, what people needed. So we leveraged Lean UX, which is a version of Build, Measure, Learn. Lean UX basically asks you to identify a challenge, establish assumptions, build and test an experiment, and do just enough to learn, just enough to make a move that doesn't seem risky. And then you validate that with stakeholders and you iterate on it. It's a way to make forward progress in the face of uncertainty, and we leverage this a lot. We did weekly sprints that were all based around Lean UX methodology. What was nice is that it's how we got a design system off the ground, by pulling in our stakeholders, because when you do that validation step, they're immediately part of the conversation, so it forces that conversation to happen. And then we were building to meet a specific need rather than a speculative thing, so that's another reason that we really like this method. Later, you can see some bloops and blops here a little bit later, when we needed to execute and deliver actual product, we modified Lean UX to be a build, measure, learn methodology. And this is another one of those like naming, maybe semantics thing, but Lean UX is an undervalued, I think, or underknown methodology. It doesn't always go over well with cross-functional teams, but build, measure, learn is essentially the same thing, and if you need to use that as a term, totally go for it. It's essentially the same thing. We modified Lean UX and just did the same process, but starting small. So you start with one small team, or you start with one tiny component, or you start with one little idea, and then you gather feedback, iterate, and roll that out widely. Practically speaking, anytime we had a tangible deliverable or a new way of working, we can apply lean thinking to it. And we've done this with the scorecard, which I just mentioned. Deprecation model is another one we're using this on. Contribution, so that's when I alluded to the team earlier who we kind of sent an ambassador to. That ambassadorship itself was a build, measure, learn process. We tried it with one team, learned a lot, and now we're going to roll that out more widely. Standards and documentation, especially for refining things like navigation and wayfinding. And it helps folks into the idea of change also, because they're along with you for the journey. They're along with you and part of the decision-making process. So that feeling of belonging that I just talked about, and that feeling of being a part of something and building something together, that's culture. That's a community. But the thing that really makes a community is not the buildings. It's a place you want to be. It's not the tangible stuff or the goods and services, really. It actually has a lot more to do with the people that inhabit that community. It has to do with that feeling of belonging, with that feeling of being heard, with that feeling of being all in it together and maybe looking towards the same North Star. It's the people you interact with all around those things that make that culture and that community. And the design system can be a part of that. You're working with shared resources. Maybe you have shared values. You build up eventually to that shared language, and then you're all creating something together. Eventually, this is going to feel magical. You get a shared destination. It might change, but you're all in it together on the same path. That builds up to that shared understanding. You can suddenly choreograph and do things that are more complex because you all have the same language and the same tools, and you're all on the same page. That builds itself into this shared equity. Everyone is dedicated, and everyone is really in it. And that really enables that shared execution. If you can share all of that, you can't help but share a culture. And culture, like trust, is a two-way street. So I talked a lot about how we can shape that culture, but you also need to allow the design system to be shaped by the culture that you're a part of. You shape it and it shapes you. And by extension, if you're pulling your partners close, if your company, then your company culture shapes your design system, and your design system can shape that culture. So take care. Be mindful of what you're putting out there. The energy of your design system can and will affect the way that your teams work together, the way that your company works together. This took us a little by surprise, because honestly, when I was brought on, I was told you're building a design system, and I thought, well, that's components and that's style. It's no big deal. But it's so much more than components and styles. And think of the power in that. You can grow not just libraries, but the idea of what a design system can be and the purpose that it can serve in your organization. Scaling a design system is not just a technology problem, a technology challenge, or a design challenge. It's a human challenge, and it's a worthy one to undertake. So think about what this means to you as a leader or a contributor to a design system, and give yourself permission to push on something in a different way. As you continue on your journey, whether it's creating a design system or another set of work, ask yourself what impact you can have if you pull your partners closer to you. What ways can you be creative and scrappy to create that trust and build empathy for the greater good? Oh, what next? Oh. And that's Stitch.
That was a gigantic knowledge bomb. Holy smokes.
It's not even all of it.
You all did a hell of a lot of work. Seriously.
It's good to take a rest.
Yeah, it's good to take a rest. But it's also good to reflect. I mean, I think what's incredible is like how you're sort of sharing, what looked like a really hard-earned, sort of success, right? And you're able to sort of reflect back on it. So like I want to dive into that, especially like, I mean, there's so much to comment on, but like, and ask you about, but like, let's start with the fundamentals. Tell me about, you talked a little bit about these sort of like embedded developers and things like that. And there's the two of you. Who else is on like the sort of core Stitch team?
Oh, they're here.
They're here. Raise your hands.
Yeah.
Hi, folks. Good job.
So do you want to?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we have two teams, right? So we have, on our e-commerce Stitch team, we have, I think we're at like 8 developers, 10 developers, 1 designer, Flo's back there.
And me.
And Teresa, who was the sole design system for a very, very long time, alongside me. We have a product manager, scrum master, and a business analyst. Am I missing anyone? I think that's it. It's a little bit smaller on our stores enablement team. They're a little bit behind on their journey, the e-commerce space. So
Yeah.
3 dedicated developers, 1 designer, an architect overseeing the tech side.
That's awesome.
And Teresa and I.
And when you say developer, are these like front-end people
Front-end.
exclusively? Yeah. Okay. So that's sort of an interesting thing, and it sort of gets into a little bit of, design systems is almost an unfortunate name, right? It's like what the ratio you just described is like, oh, there's a lot more sort of developers to designers. That's really fascinating. So okay, that's awesome. So how I mean, again, this didn't happen overnight, and you acknowledge as much. Like, it sounds like all these different brands are bought in on these ideas. Like, how did you, like, were there like growing pains, or just like was there any open hostility to this, or just like a reluctance, or just like a lack of education, or some combination of those things? And like, how did you sort of earn that trust? Like, I love how you said it. It's like, what are like those like scrappy things you could do, like in those initial phases, like before the system existed or as you were building it? Like, how did you go about sort of winning hearts and minds?
Yeah, it was a long journey. It's interesting because each of the brands they really do have a different personality. Yeah. So you work with each creative director, and It's also a hard space because I think, so each of the brands, I don't know if anyone knows how retail often works, but we work directly with the creative directors of the digital space for each of the brands. They, in turn, are getting a lot of creative direction from their corporate heads. So, and those folks are thinking about things like store signage and store experiences and advertising and all of that. And so they're already interpreting some things, and so we come in and just try to interpret again. So the co-creation really mattered a lot, like sitting down together and figuring out if some of the brands will have brand guidelines, some of them that's in flux at different times. Yeah, you probably have a lot to say about this.
Oh, yeah. Well, when I first joined the company back in 2013, I came in as a creative director in UX, and that was a completely new role. We were a really small 3-person UX team at that point. So first thing I did, first 2 weeks into the company, is I made appointments with meetings with each one of the brand creative directors, and a couple of them, I swear, I almost got kicked out of their office because they're like, I have a creative team. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? I don't understand. And at one point, I had to say, okay, pause this conversation. I'm going to come back to you in like 3 months because I'll have something for you to talk with me, something tangible to talk about. I thought it was more of a meet and greet, like, hey, we're going to work together. And they're like, no, I don't understand what you do. So it took some time. And what ended up being the tipping point there was back 2013, 14-ish, when we were applying responsive to our e-commerce experience. We saw that as an opportunity to like completely overhaul the entire experience. And that was the point where I was like, ooh, design system, and we have all this amazing brand stuff we can do. So I could go to my brand partners and say, hey, this is our product detail page. It's like the most important page in our e-commerce experience. We're working on pulling together research, and here's what our research looks like, and we need to completely scrap this experience and rebuild new. It's gonna be amazing. Do you wanna help me design it? And that was the point where they're like, yeah, we've been hoping to actually be involved in this for years. So that's the point at which they started to understand how UX and creative marketing all work together. From there on, then I was able to say, so you see all these little bits and pieces, we can actually pull those out to create a system out of them, and we can have our engineering team reuse the code that makes those display on the site, so then you don't have to work so hard to get your brands displayed consistently on the site, so it feels consistent with your store experiences.
Right.
Because at that point in time, that just didn't exist.
That's fantastic. So you're aligning your job to what their goals are, and sort of saying like, we're here to help, all right? Like we're here to help you do amazing things. That's so cool.
Yeah.
And you keep mentioning about like how just different these brands can be, and I've worked with sort of companies that have like, sort of worked with different brands that are on systems that have like a different sort of like theming aspect to it. So it's like, how do you manage sort of these wildly different brands that, some might be, turned up or going like way crazy, other ones might be like more refined and sort of like toned down. Like, how do you sort of, in like one of these like co-creating sessions, if they're like, we want this like crazy hero area with like all these like, sort of whiz bang things, or like a very unique layout, like what's your role in that to like sort of think more systems minded and like get them to better understand it's like, like maybe we don't do this crazy thing that might be a little too unique, or like how do you sort of rein them in and sort of manage the different brand expectations and stuff? That's
a great question because it has happened recently. It's fresh in the mind. One of the things that we do to manage that is this sort of piloting thing. Like we'll often work through one of those complex areas, a co-creation problem, with one brand at a time. Just take somebody on first. That's usually there's one brand that's really excited about some specific thing. Maybe they're relaunching denim or something like that. We'll work with them on whatever they think that they need. And then the next step is often breaking that thing down into smaller pieces. The brands often come with a big vision. They're visionaries, they're creatives. They have this big thing that they want to have happen, and we're able to come in and help them think about the modularity or the componentization of that. And then another benefit of being central is we can take that and kind of shop it around to the other brands and say, hey, we've got all these things on this platter, like what do you want? Do you want any of these things? And that helps us prioritize, and we can have that conversation.
Right.
It's not easy or direct, though. There's always a back and forth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard. Like that. I think that's something that I've encountered in every system I've come into contact with, is like that, how wide open and like composable, like take what you want and do whatever you want with it, versus like locked down. Like the extreme end being, it's like we share the same PDP template, and it's like you could change the colors and that's it, right?
Which is where we started. That's total, and that I think was interesting because that wasn't the promise of design systems. So now that we're actually able to deliver on the promise and plug things together in a more customized way, we're getting a lot more traction. I think, where there's a lot of trust is there. But yeah,
that's awesome. That's so, and that's great to hear. And it's like your journey, like years long journey through this, I think is like really empowering for everyone in the room, just because it's like, start somewhere, and like sometimes that somewhere is like templates, which ain't exactly exciting for anybody. But like if that like is the thing that gets you at least starting to think the same, then you can sort of go from there. What sort of metrics are hard to come by and hard to talk about when it comes to design systems? Like do you have any sort of like quantifiable metrics that you're sort of looking at as far as like gauging how successful the design system is? But then also like what are the more sort of qualitative or more sort of just cultural sort of signals that you're looking for to determine the health of the system?
Okay, there's a lot in there. I'd say adoption is probably one that everyone's looking at, right? How many teams do we have that are adopting and actually using our design system? So
like when I go to a URL, like I'm seeing the system in action, right?
Mostly.
Unless you're one of those like store people. Yeah, all right.
All those product teams are building moving trains, so yeah, they're not always using our design system. They might be using like the styling part of it, so like fonts, colors, but a lot of them need to just build their own components and push them out there and then circle back around with us to contribute, and that's fine. That's something that we didn't realize at first we were going to need to be okay with, whether we liked it or not. So contribution, we talk a lot about like page performance, page load, which is really hard to measure, especially when you have components nested within other components and then you have the entire page. So performance is proving to be a tricky one.
That one's especially hard because we do have in the system not just transactional components that are core to the making a purchase, which we lock down. We also have a whole lot of components that are configurable for marketing content, and those can take any number of assets and they can be implemented in a very liberal way. And so providing some guidelines around that, and maybe I'm really inspired actually by the earlier talk with the design tooling. Maybe there's tooling that helps us guide people on the right way along some of that.
But and then I guess like from more of like the cultural angles of this, like like what are like the things, you talked about like the office hours and like all of that, like it's sort of great opportunities for feedback and like troubleshooting and stuff. But like beyond those sort of office hours, are there like other things that you're just like, people seem less angry, or you're hiring more people?
So actually, this is a really small thing, but on our we have to use Microsoft Teams. We can't use Slack. So I was going to say on Slack, but I can't. Sorry. On Teams, we have a channel. It hurts my heart. We have a channel, though, called Kudos. And we kind of like just like we harvest patterns and stuff, we harvest good feedback so that we can share it back out and just like sit on it and be like, yes, we did something right. So sometimes we just run across that stuff organically, and then we actually use the newsletter to propagate that propaganda back out a little bit.
Heck yeah!
Look, people think we're cool.
Like, that's real propaganda, right? Like that's like, you're not making it up.
No.
Like Jane Doe said, "This is the best system I've ever used in my life."
Dark design system patterns.
Dark design system patterns. I love it. That's fantastic. We could probably talk all day, but again, I encourage like everybody to seek you guys out, and there's a lot to unpack. I think a lot of people are in similar boats. So thank you all, everybody.
Yeah.
Give it up.
Thanks.